Hi everyone, we're going to carry on reading our book, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And if you remember from yesterday, we got up to chapter 4 called The Secret Workers. Now Charlie is just about to hear the rest of the story from Grandpa Joe. The next evening, Grandpa Joe went on with his story. You see, Charlie, he said, not so very long ago, there used to be thousands of people working in Mr. Willy Wonka's factory. Then one day, all of a sudden, Mr. Wonka asked every single one of them to leave, to go home and never come back. But why? Asked Charlie. Because of spies. Spies? Yes, all other chocolate makers, you see, had begun to grow jealous of the wonderful sweets that Mr. Willy Wonka was making. And they started sending spies for his secret recipes. The spies took jobs in Wonka's factory, pretending they were ordinary workers. And while they were, each one of them found out how to make a certain special thing. And did they go back to their own factories and tell on him? They must have, answered Grandpa Joe, because soon after that, Finkelgrubber's factory started making an ice cream that would never melt, even in the hottest sun. Then Prodnose's factory came out with a chewing gum that never lost its flavour, however much you chewed it. And then Mr. Slugworth's factory began making sugar balloons. You could blow up huge sizes before you popped them with a pin and gobbled them up. And so on and so on. And Mr. Willy Wonka tore his beard and shouted, "This is terrible. I shall be ruined. There are spies everywhere. I shall have to close the factory." But he didn't do that, said Charlie. Oh yes, he did. He told all workers that he was sorry, but they would have to go home. Then he shut the main gates and fastened them with a chain. And suddenly, Wonka's giant chocolate factory became silent and deserted. The chimney stopped smoking, machines stopped whirling, and from then on, not a single chocolate or sweet was made. Not a soul went in, not a soul came out. And even Mr. Willy Wonka disappeared completely. Months and months went by. Grandpa Joe went on, but the factory remained closed, and everybody said, "Poor Mr. Willy Wonka, he was so nice and made such marvellous things, but he's finished now, it's all over." Then something astonishing happened. One day in the early morning, thin columns of white smoke were seen coming out of the tops of tall chimneys of the factory. People in the town stopped and stared. "What's going on?" they cried. "Someone's lit the furnaces. Mr. Wonka must be opening up again." They ran to the gates, expecting to see them wide open, and Mr. Willy Wonka standing there to welcome his workers back. But no, the great iron gates were still locked and chained as securely as ever, and Mr. Wonka was nowhere to be seen. "But the factory is working," the people shouted. "Listen, you can hear the machines. They're whirling again. And you can smell the melting chocolate in the air." Grandpa Joe leaned forward and laid a long bony finger on Charlie's knee and said softly, "But most mysterious of all, Charlie, were the shadows in the window of the factory. The people standing on the street outside could see small dark shadows moving behind the frosted glass windows." "Shadows of whom?" Charlie quickly asked. That's exactly what everyone else wanted to know. "The place is full of workers," the people shouted, "but nobody's gone in. The gates are locked, it's crazy, and nobody comes out either." But there was no question at all, said Grandpa Joe, that the factory was running, and it's gone on running ever since for these last 10 years. What's more, the chocolate and sweets have been turning out have been more fantastic and delicious of all time. And of course now, when Mr. Willy Wonka invents something new and wonderful sweet, neither Mr. Finkelgrubber, nor Mr. Prodnose, nor Mr. Slugworth, nor anyone else is able to copy it. No spies can go into the factory to find out how it's made. "But Grandpa, who," said Charlie, "who is Mr. Wonka using to do all the work in the factory?" "Nobody knows, Charlie." "But that's absurd. Hasn't someone asked Mr. Wonka?" "Nobody sees him anymore. He never comes out, and the only thing that comes out of that place are chocolates and sweets. and they come out through a special trapdoor in the walls, all packaged and addressed, and they are picked up every day by post office trucks. But, Grandpa, what sort of people are they that work in there? My dear boy, said Grandpa Joe, that is one of the great mysteries of the chocolate-making world. We only know one thing about them. They are very small. The faint shadows that sometimes appear behind the windows, especially late at night when the lights are on, are those of tiny people no taller than my knee. There aren't such people, Charlie said. Just then, Mr. Bucket, Charlie's father, came into the room. He was home from the toothpaste factory, and he was waving an evening newspaper rather excitedly. Have you heard the news? Have you heard the news? He cried, and he held up the paper so they could see the huge headline. And the headline said, Wonka factory to be opened at last to a lucky few. Oh, that sounds really exciting. Now, the next chapter is called The Golden Tickets. So we'll be going back in for that tomorrow. See you then.